Hi, my name is Shelby, and this is Merrily Morbid. In the world of herpetology, which studies snakes, there is a group called the Big Four. They are the four deadliest snakes in the world in terms of numbers of deaths per year. They are all found in Asia, and particularly in India, which has the most snake bites and the most fatal snake bites than any other country in the world. Today we will talk about these four snakes: the common krait, the saw-scaled viper, Russell's viper, and the Indian cobra. I have also added in a bonus snake. But first, we have to talk about venom. Let's talk about the difference between poisonous animals and venomous animals. A poison is a toxin, usually inside of an animal's body, that is used as a form of defense. An animal is poisonous if it makes a predator sick when it tries to eat it. Venom is made up of toxins and is used by animals usually when hunting, although it can be used in self-defense if needed. So simply put, poison is ingested and venom is injected. The next thing we need to talk about is how venom actually works. There are a few different kinds of venom, and each target something different. There are hemotoxins, neurotoxins, cytotoxins, and cardiotoxins. Some animals have a single type of toxin, while others have a combination of different toxins. When it comes to snakes, members of the elapid family, which include taipans, mambas, and coral snakes, usually have neurotoxins. Members of the viper family usually have venom that contains hemotoxins. But what does that actually mean? Neurotoxins are targeted towards the nervous system. They cause symptoms like slurring of speech, poor coordination, immobility through muscle rigidness or paralysis. Neurotoxic venom usually causes death when paralysis sets in on a muscle called the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a very important muscle that sits between the chest and the abdomen. When it contracts, it creates more room in the chest and allows lungs to fill up with air. When it relaxes, it squeezes the chest and pushes air out of the lungs. When neurotoxins paralyze the diaphragm, breathing stops and the person quickly suffocates. Next are the hemotoxins, which target and destroy oxygen-carrying red blood cells, stop the body's ability to clot, or cause the blood to clot uncontrollably, and cause generalized damage to tissues and organs. A person injected with hemotoxins can experience extreme swelling and bruising. They can experience uncontrollable bleeding and can even bleed from the eyes and mouth. Then there are cytotoxins. They deal damage directly to cells within the body. They cause severe swelling, severe blistering, and tissue death. What surprised me is that cytotoxins actually aren't as deadly as hemotoxins or neurotoxins. And finally, there are the cardiotoxins. You might be able to guess from the name what that targets. Yeah, the heart. Cardiotoxins stop the heart from functioning properly. They can cause low blood pressure or high blood pressure, low heart rate or a high heart rate. They can cause atrial fibrillation, which causes the heart chambers to beat out of sync. And of course, it can cause a heart attack or cardiac arrest. All right, now let's get into the snakes. There are many different ways to define deadliest when it comes to venomous snakes. It could mean that it has the most potent venom, ounce for ounce. It could mean that it has the highest mortality rate. Since snakes don't always inject the full amount of venom, a snake that is considered the deadliest by venom potency may not actually have a high mortality rate, especially if the snake does dry bites, where they bite as a defense mechanism, but don't actually envenomate. The definition that I'm using for deadliest in this video isn't the potency or mortality rate, but the actual numbers of death per year. And since I wanted to pick a snake that lives in the seas of Asia, there was one snake that stood out far above the others. Each year, anywhere from 15,000 to 75,000 fishermen are bitten by sea snakes. 80% of these are dry bites, and only 3% of snake bites are fatal. Sea snakes are usually pretty docile and usually only become aggressive when caught up in fishing nets. What's interesting is that 90% of fatal bites come from one species alone, the beaked sea snake. So by doing some math, it can be said that the beaked sea snake kills around 400 to 2,000 people per year. The beaked sea snake also goes by a few other names, the hooked-nosed sea snake, the common sea snake, and also has a local language name that means net biter, as nets are where they are most commonly found. Their beaked name comes from the hook-shaped upper jaw that they have. These snakes can weigh up to 4 pounds and are usually between 3 and 5 feet long, with a paddle-shaped tail that allows them to swim better. Like most species of sea snakes, they can breathe through their skin and also have glands under their tongues that excrete salt, allowing them to regulate their salt levels. They are most common around the coast of India, but they can be found as far as Madagascar to the west and as far as Australia and New Guinea to the east. The snake's favorite foods are catfish and shrimp, which they find in coastal waters, rivers, and amongst mangroves. Even though they are usually found in more shallow waters, they are able to dive as deep as 100 meters, which is over 300 feet. They can also stay underwater for up to 5 hours at a time. Beaked sea snakes are able to hunt using smell and touch. When they find their prey, they bite, envenomating it with a neurotoxic venom that is 4 to 8 times more potent than Cobra venom. The prey is quickly paralyzed, and then the snake swallows the prey whole. Now, I always like to give a first-hand account for each topic, but I had a hard time finding one regarding this particular snake. Because the victims are often poor fishermen from countries like India, their stories are not often told to the wider world. And to add to that, the sea snakes probably get away after biting, and so the species isn't often identified. The only first-hand account for the beaked sea snake that I could find was one that took place quite recently in December of 2023. A fisherman at a beach in the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh found a beaked sea snake trapped in his fishing net. He had believed that the snake had swam into a school of fish to hunt and was inadvertently pulled in. Luckily, the man saw the snake and was able to release the snake without incident, but noted that it had been a particularly long beaked sea snake, measuring around 7 feet long. Our next snake doesn't live in the water, but does prefer to stay close by to it. It is the first of the big 4 snakes, the common krait. It is the least deadly of the big 4, but is still responsible for over 10,000 deaths per year. They are usually found in forests, rocky terrain, grasslands, and on the outskirts of villages in Pakistan, India, and Sri Lanka. They weigh in at 2.5 pounds and are usually around 3 feet long, but they have been known to grow up to 6 feet. They are nocturnal and have an extra wide forked tongue that allows them to hunt in pitch darkness. Their usual prey consists of small mammals, frogs, lizards, but they particularly like eating other snakes. When common kraits are young, they take it a step further and are cannibalistic. They will eat other common kraits. Their venom contains neurotoxins that quickly paralyze prey. When it comes to their interactions with humans, the most important thing to know about the common krait is it's not a fan of the dry bite. If a common krait bites you, you have been envenomated, and you will need to seek medical attention quickly. Once paralysis sets in, the antivenom is useless. Suffocation occurs 4 to 8 hours after the bite, and without antivenom or a ventilator for when paralysis sets in, 70 to 80% of people die. If a person is able to be put on a ventilator, it is usually 8 or 9 days before that person is able to breathe on their own again. Perhaps the scariest thing about the common krait is that some areas, people are most likely to be bitten in their sleep. The common krait's fangs are so tiny, and since they don't have any hemotoxins, the pain when bitten is minimal. A person can be bitten in their sleep, never feel it, and never wake up. There is even a myth that says that these snakes seek out people, curl up on their chest, and suck the life out of them. The best way to avoid a bite from this species is something as simple as sleeping in a bed. One study in Sri Lanka found that 100% of people in a village were bitten while sleeping on the floor. Another study done on a village with a particularly high rate of bites showed that when they all began sleeping in beds, the number of bites dropped to 0. Now, it doesn't mean that being bitten while awake doesn't happen. It's just not as common. During the day, the common krait is known to be extremely tolerant and can be handled. They are actually pretty docile and prefer to run from confrontation, but when they are pushed enough, they will attack, and when they do, they don't hold back. On August 19, 2022, a farmer in his 50s named Devendra Mishra caught a common krait that was slithering around a neighbor's house in a village in the Uttar Pradesh district of India. At one point, he had been the head of the village, and he was well known in the village for catching snakes. On that day, it was said that he was showing off and went around the village with the snake wrapped around his neck. He had filmed himself with the snake wrapped around his neck and even stopped to wrap it around the neck of a 5-year-old girl. The snake ended up biting him around an hour after he caught it. He tried to alleviate the venom with natural herbs, but he died the night of August 20th. He had caught around 200 snakes in the village before. Had he gone to a hospital and was treated with a high dose of antivenom, it is possible that he could have survived. The next snake on our list is the Russell's viper. It is the second deadliest snake in the world and kills around 25,000 people per year. It is named for Patrick Russell, who was an 18th century Scottish herpetologist who spent years in India. His passion was studying snakes to save lives. It's a hefty snake weighing in at 5 pounds and reaching around 5 feet long. The Russell's viper is found from Pakistan to China, but is also found on the island nation of Indonesia. They are found in forests, shrubland, and their favorite place are areas with long grass. It's not known how they do it, but they are able to hunt their prey through sensing body heat. They are ambush predators and lie in wait for their preferred prey to run into them. It's also important to know that they do not retreat. If they sense a possible threat, such as an unsuspecting person walking through tall grass, they will not flee. They will stand their ground, and if that person gets too close, they will feel extreme pain as half-inch fangs sink in. The pain from one of these bites can last up to a month, and that's if you live that long. The venom is pretty potent and is capable of killing 22 people with a single bite. Believe it or not, the Russell's viper is actually pretty beneficial to humans in a few different ways. Since their favorite prey consists of rodents like rats and mice, they are important for the control of deadly diseases such as leptospirosis and hantavirus. Leptospirosis is a bacterial infection that can cause kidney or liver failure, respiratory failure, or meningitis, each of which can kill. And then there is hantavirus, which essentially causes a person to suffocate as their lungs fill with fluid. The Russell's viper is also incredibly helpful as its venom has been used in laboratories for testing of different types of medical conditions. But even as they are helpful to people, don't forget they are still the second deadliest snake in the world in terms of numbers of deaths. With their hemotoxic venom, their bites usually lead to uncontrollable bleeding and can cause acute kidney failure. In 2022, an unnamed man from West Bengal was rushed to Mindapur Medical College and Hospital after he was bitten by a Russell's viper on his foot. Initially, he was given 10 vials of antivenom, but when the swelling continued, the doctors gave him 20 more vials. The next day, it was discovered that he was suffering from something called capillary leak syndrome, which causes the liquid part of the blood to leak out of the blood vessels. He began experiencing very painful swelling on both sides of his face. What was strange about his case was that although capillary leak syndrome is common in those bitten by the Russell's viper, it usually doesn't happen after antivenom has been given, and especially not after 30 vials are given. Over the next 2 days, he continued to get worse. His kidneys began to fail, and he began having blood in his urine. and 4 days after his bite, he passed away. The next snake is one that I hadn't been familiar with before doing research for this video. Despite not being well known, it kills more people than any other snake in the world, with around 30,000 people meeting their fate when they meet the saw-scaled viper. There are 12 recognized species of saw-scaled vipers, and they cover a lot of land, ranging from Africa through the Middle East and down to Asia. Due to the very hot temperatures that they live in, they travel using a sidewinding method, which allows them to keep minimal amount of contact with the ground, keeping them as cool as possible. They like to live in the desert and savannas and spend most of their time during the day hiding, whether in a burrow, in the ground, buried in the sand, or hiding under rocks. When it rains, these snakes will seek out higher ground, usually climbing into trees or bushes. Then, at night, saw-scaled vipers come out and look for food. Little is known about their diet, but they have been observed eating things like mice, insects, spiders, frogs, and other small snakes. Pretty much anything on the smaller side because these snakes are actually pretty small. In spite of being the deadliest snake in the world, at their biggest, they usually weigh around a pound and are usually only between 1 and 3 feet long. Because of their small size, they usually aren't seen until it's too late. But they do have a warning that they give. When they feel threatened, they ride their bodies in a way that scrapes their scales together, making a sizzling kind of sound. But if you ignore this warning or don't see it, things get dicey, as it has one of the fastest strikes in the world. The saw-scaled viper is very aggressive, and since it usually lives pretty close to people, this allows the snake to have an extremely high rate of bites. Even though a single bite can kill up to 6 adults, it only injects about 80% of the time. The snake also usually doesn't inject all of its venom, so it ends up with a 10% mortality rate, even with treatment. It just attests to the staggeringly high number of bites this snake is responsible for. Its venom is unlike any of the other snakes in the Big Four. Saw-scaled viper venom contains 4 different types of toxins: hemotoxins, neurotoxins, cytotoxins, and cardiotoxins, so almost every system in the body is affected. What is interesting is that because of the huge geographical range, there are huge variations from region to region. An antivenom that works for the saw-scaled viper in Pakistan may not work for a snake bite from a saw scale in Sri Lanka. There are also at least 8 antivenoms for the various regions, but because of how rural the areas are, the lack of structured healthcare, and suspicion towards Western medicine, the bites kill more often than they should. People often turn to herbal folk remedies. Masi Sadian is a snake catcher from Tamil Nadu. He catches venomous snakes, which he sells to the government so they can be used to produce antivenom. One day, he had been unloading his catch for the day. He counted each snake as he pulled it out of his sack. And as he counted the 6th snake, he suddenly felt a bite, which happened to be from a saw-scaled viper. He rushed home to reach for traditional medicines. As the day turned into night, his mouth began to bleed, and then his nose began to bleed. He decided that the traditional medicines weren't working well enough, and he was brought to the closest hospital. He said he didn't feel any fear, and he admits that he isn't afraid of death because there's no point. Everybody dies someday. In January of 2017, Sadian and his friend Vadaval Gopal took their expertise of Asian snakes with them when they were part of a project to hunt down Burmese pythons in Florida. Burmese pythons have become an invasive species after years of exotic pet owners releasing the snakes into the Florida swamps when the snakes become too much for their owners to handle. The first month they were in Florida, they had already caught 27 Burmese pythons down near Key Largo. In January 2023, Sadhyan and Gopal were given the great honor of being awarded an Indian prize called the Padma Shri. It is the fourth highest award given to civilians in India. They received it for their service to the country by supplying snakes for the production of antivenom so thousands of lives could be saved. And now we come to our final snake of the big four. It may not be the deadliest, but it is absolutely the most famous. 15,000 people a year die when they encounter the Indian cobra. These snakes are famous in television and movies for being the snakes that are kept by snake charmers. They appear to dance to the music, but what they are really doing is copying the movement of the instrument. They are also famous for having a hood that is decorated with eyes in the front and eyes connected by a white loop on their back. It appears to look as if the back eyes on a cobra are wearing glasses, which gives it another name, the spectacled cobra. Not to be confused with the monocled cobra, which is also known as the Indian spitting cobra. The Indian cobra spreads its hood in an act of defense. They weigh between 4.5 and 6.5 pounds and are a good 6 or 7 feet in length. Although called the Indian cobra, they are also found in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Bhutan. They make their homes in forests and grasslands, but can also be found in rice paddies and near human homes. They are good swimmers and can also climb, so it isn't hard to believe that they come into contact with people pretty often. They hunt primarily through smell and can smell 2 different odors at the same time. Like the saw-scaled viper, they have a pretty varied diet that consists of small mammals, frogs, birds, lizards, reptiles, and other snakes. They have small fangs and will bite repeatedly in order to inject enough venom into their prey or their predator. When it comes to defense, although not named the spitting cobra themselves, they are in fact capable of spitting venom into the eyes of predators. If washed away quickly, the blindness induced by the venom is temporary, but if it isn't washed away, the blindness can become permanent. The venom of the Indian cobra contains both neurotoxins and cardiotoxins. So even though the Indian cobra isn't as aggressive a species, when people are bitten by it, they can experience muscle paralysis, respiratory failure, and cardiac failure. An Indian cobra bite is capable of killing an adult within 30 minutes, and without treatment, 80% of those who are bitten will die. But horrifyingly, even with treatment, half of those people will die. In Kerala, India, on May 7, 2020, Uthra was a 25-year-old wife and mother to a 1-year-old son and was found unconscious in her bed by her mother. She was rushed to the hospital where she was pronounced dead on arrival. Her autopsy would reveal that she died from the bite of an Indian cobra, which was found later in her bedroom. In any other case, that would have been the end of the story. But it wasn't the first time she had been bitten by a venomous snake. It wasn't even the first time that year. In February, she had found a Russell's viper on the stairs in their house, which her husband managed to catch. And just days later, she was bitten by a Russell's viper while she slept. She woke up in excruciating pain. Her husband was reluctant to bring her to the hospital, but eventually he did. Strangely, he claimed that Uthra had been bitten while washing clothes, not while she was sleeping. Regardless of how she was bitten, she was in the hospital for 52 days. She would receive skin grafts, and when she was finally discharged from the hospital in April, she could no longer walk. After her release, she moved back in with her parents. When she died from a snake bite just 2 weeks after getting out of the hospital, her parents didn't believe that it was just an unfortunate coincidence. Between an investigation and the autopsy, the case was blown wide open. The autopsy revealed that the snake bite wasn't natural. In court, snake experts explained that the fang marks on Uthra's body were too wide apart, as if the snake had been pushed into her arm, like a snake is when being milked. Experts refuted that it was highly improbable because Indian cobras usually aren't active at night. Even tests where an Indian cobra was thrown onto a mannequin to simulate the attack showed again and again that the snake fled each time. Experts also attested to the fact that there was no way the cobra could have gotten into the room. Only the windows were open, and since Indian cobras can only raise a third of their body above the ground, it was impossible for the snake to have been able to get through the window. Another piece of the puzzle was that Uthra had slept through something that would have been extremely painful. The only way she could have slept through something as painful as a cobra bite would be if she had been sedated. Examination of the snake, which was killed after being found in Uthra's bedroom, would reveal that the snake's stomach was empty, which meant it hadn't eaten for at least a week. Since they usually eat twice a day, it was concluded that the snake had been kept in some kind of container and wasn't fed. The investigation revealed that it was none other than her husband, Suraj Kumar, who killed her. And it was revealed that her first snake bite was also another failed attempt on her life. Kumar had married his wife for her money. At first he thought he could just live with her, but even his parents wanted in on Uthra's family's money. They wanted her family to pay for a car, appliances, house renovations, and college for Kumar's sister. Surprisingly for us in the West, but her family actually gave them the money. But for Kumar, it wasn't enough. He wanted her money, but he didn't want her. He blamed his lack of love on her learning disability. I don't know if that meant that she had a lower IQ or if she was autistic or what that meant, as it wasn't expanded on. They just called it a learning disorder. Regardless, he planned her murder for months and researched snakes for months. In February, he bought a Russell's Viper from a local snake handler for 10,000 rupees, or the equivalent of $135 in the US. He had put the snake on the staircase, hoping Uthra would be bitten, but she saw it and cried out for her husband. He recaptured the snake, and days later, he sedated his wife before forcing that same snake to bite her. Her sedation wasn't strong enough, and she immediately woke up. This was when she was hospitalized. Before his wife got out of the hospital, he was already plotting his next attempt. After her release, he bought another snake, this time an Indian cobra. He sedated his wife again, and after she fell asleep, he threw the snake onto the bed twice. But just as the experts showed during the trial, the snake tried to escape each time. It was only when Kumar grabbed the snake and forced it into Uthra's arm that she was envenomated. He pulled the snake back and forced it down again onto her arm for a second bite. Kumar had finally succeeded in killing his wife and the mother of his 1-year-old son. Kumar and the snake handler who sold him both of the snakes would be arrested. Although once it was learned that the snake handler hadn't known what the snakes were for, he was pardoned and later testified in court against Kumar. Kumar pled not guilty, but he was convicted and given 2 life sentences, one for the murder and one for her attempted murder. And that's it for today. If you want to learn more about today's topics, see my description box below to find my resources and recommendations. If you enjoyed today's video and want to see more morbid topics, like this video, subscribe to my channel, and comment down below which snakes scare you the most, whether it's one of the ones discussed today or another one you have in mind. Remember to be merry, but stay morbid.